Good afternoon. I'm going to tell you the story of a fantastic scientist by the name of Ignaz Semmelweis. Now, Semmelweis was the director of a hospital in Vienna. And in Vienna, there were two places where women could give birth if they chose. Um, they could go to the ward where the midwives were, or they could go to a ward where the doctors were. So I'm just going to change my colour here. Yellow, I think. Now, the midwives had one job. They came to work, they helped women give birth, and then they went home again. That was it. That was all they did. The doctors, and there weren't as many doctors back in this time as there are now, so they would tend to do a little bit of everything. They would come to work, they'd help some women give birth, they'd go to another part of the hospital, they'd come back and help more women give birth. They'd go to the morgue and cut up dead bodies because they were quite often still learning about different parts of anatomy and about what could cause people to die. So they would learn a lot from dead bodies. They'd go back, help some more women give birth, go to another hospital, go to the morgue, go back, and eventually at some point they'd go home. So they were all over the place. Now, Ignaz noticed that there was one big difference between the area, the ward where the midwives worked and the ward where the doctors worked. And that was in the rate of women dying after childbirth. The midwives had a great success rate. They were brilliant. Very few of the women died, and the doctors were not so great. Quite a few of the women who gave birth there died. And what they died of was a disease called, at the time, childbed fever. So it was a condition that women would get after they gave birth. They would get a fever, they would get chills, they would get shaky, they would get aches, they'd lose their appetite, and quite often they would die. Obviously, this was something that the director of this hospital was really keen to prevent and to reduce the number of people dying of it. And he had a great situation for doing scientific experiments. He had a control, the midwife ward, that he could keep constant, and he had the doctor's ward that he could change and to see whether it would improve. And so he started looking at the differences between the two and how they did things differently. He noticed that the midwives tend to have the women in a different position when they were giving birth. So they tried changing that, no effect. There were some things that seemed silly, like a priest ringing a bell in the doctor's ward, but not in the nurse's midwife's ward. And so they banned the priest from ringing his bell. Obviously, that had no effect as well. One thing happened which changed how Ignaz Semmelweis thought about this thing. And that was when one of his friends was in the morgue dissecting a body of a woman who had died in childbed fever. And he cut himself. And after he cut himself, after he cut himself, he died. And what was particularly interesting about his death was that he died of childbed fever. And that kind of raised eyebrows because he was a man and so he didn't give birth. So how did he get childbed fever? And that got Ignaz thinking, oh, maybe this can be passed on from person to person, because he had cut himself while dissecting someone who had died of this, and then he died of it. Maybe it can be passed on. And so what he did was said that his doctors, when they were moving between the morgue and the rest of the hospital, they had to wash their hands. And possibly by a bit of logic, possibly by a bit of luck, he actually said to wash their hands with chlorine, which is really, really good for killing bacteria. And the rate of childbed fever in the doctor ward plummeted. It was as good as the death rate in the midwife ward, which is just brilliant. It was really obvious. This is what we've changed. This is what happened. It was clear. It was straightforward. The data was brilliant. You couldn't argue with it. Except that people did try to argue with it because These were well-off, educated, well-thought-of surgeons being told that they are dirty and are causing the death of their patients, which they didn't like. And Ignaz Semmelweis was not a very good communicator. And so when they argued about it, he didn't like it and he didn't take it well. He didn't rationalize, he didn't logic, he got angry, he got borderline offensive, and eventually he got fired. And then when he got fired, the death rates in the doctor's ward went way up again because people stopped washing their hands. And Ignaz did not do well from that point. He wasn't a very personable person. He struggled to find a job. He knew that he had, figured out the key to helping people not die of simple infections, but people weren't listening to him. And understandably, he got frustrated. And eventually, he had a nervous breakdown. And at that time, nervous breakdowns were not particularly well handled, and so he got committed to a mental asylum that he tried to escape from. I should say, up to this point, we are dealing in fact. From this point onwards, I believe it's a bit of speculation. It makes a really nice story, so I'm a little bit skeptical that this is what actually happened. But it's a great story, so I'm going to tell it. He tried to escape. And when he got captured, he got beaten quite badly by a guard, and was injured. And so he had to go and see the doctor in the mental asylum. And he begged the doctor to wash his hands before he treated him, because he knew if that doctor washed his hands, he was less likely to get infected and it would be better for him. The doctor didn't listen, because why would you listen to the ravings of one of your apparently crazy patients at a mental asylum? And Semmelweis got an infection and he got sepsis and he died. So someone who, discovered the benefits of washing hands, unfortunately died because someone wouldn't wash their hands. It's one of my favorite stories. It's incredibly sad, but equally, it makes it quite a nice story